Hello and welcome to Scran, the podcast passionate about the Scottish food and drink scene. I'm your host, Rosalind, and on today's episode, I visit Aberargie Distillery in Perthshire. The launch of the new Aberargie Whisky next March will mark the return to production for the Morrison family, arguably one of Scotland's most famous whisky families. Whilst there, I was given a tour of the distillery by Head of Distilling, Graeme Mackeddie, who shared with me what sets the new whisky apart and his hopes for next year onwards. After my tour, I met with Brian Morrison, owner and founder, who told me about the previous generations of his family that worked in whisky and why, after 25 years, it's time for them to get back in the game. I also speak to MD Niel Hendricks, who shares the vision for the business and guides me in a tasting of what will become the new whisky, which will be out in March 2026.
So we are at Aberargie Distillery on Neverton Farm by Aberargie Village. We've been here since 2016, 2017. Distillery was built in 2017 and been operational since October, November 2017. We grow our own barley and the ambition is to be a bottle to barley operation, so being in control of the whole process as much as we possibly can. As a family, we have 3 or 4 different farms, growing our own barley primarily for malting. Much of that is going for our own distillery, growing 2 key varieties for us, Golden Promise, which is a heritage variety, very important to our character and our flavour profile. And we also grow modern barley varietals, which they're good yielding on the farm and they're good yielding for the distillery and also play a key part in our character. Golden Promise generates a heavier character, and Laureate, one of our modern varieties, for example, generates a light, fruity, estery part of the character. So it strikes a balance. 2 different crops on the farm, 2 very different crops for the distillery, and 2 very different spirits that we then blend together to generate a single malt, which is nicely balanced.
I don't think heritage varieties are that common in whisky production. It's always Laureate for now.
Laureate and other modern varietals like Concerto and whatnot they're favoured. They're favoured for yield purposes. So, rightly or wrongly, decision-making in the whisky industry is very much financially driven. So, modern varietals, they yield very well on the farm. So, off the back of a combine harvester, you get a decent tonnage to the acre. So they're good on the farm side, they're good for the maltsters, and they yield well through a distillery. So effectively for every ton of malt you get more alcohol from that. Older varieties like Golden Promise, they yield poorly on the farm, they yield poorly in the distillery. They're challenging to process at times, but where they shine is flavour and character. A far richer spirit comes off a Golden Promise than does off Laureate, in our experience with our distillery. Everyone's mileage might vary a little bit in that, but we are firm believers that Golden Promise offers something different and something unique, and it's something worth the cost in terms of yield on the farm, cost in terms of yield in distillery. It's part of what we do.
And was it grown here historically because it is a heritage grain?
It would have been grown across Scotland historically, so it dates back to the 60s, and at that point it was popular with the maltsters, and it was popular across Scotland with the farmers. Of its time, it was relatively good yielding on the farms, etc., relatively resilient to issues you have on the farm. For example, where we are very exposed to the wind. That can create issues with crops as they come to maturity, wanting to fall over in the wind, etc. And Golden Promise is relatively short in its body and its straw, and it's resilient to falling over and whatnot, which is good from a farm perspective. It just yields poorly in terms of the tonnage of barley coming off of the crop. So this is a relatively new venture. This farm's been in the family for well over a decade. Historically, this has just been a farm. There's been nothing here in terms of distilling. We've been blessed with a Victorian well as a water source, and Jamie's seen the opportunity to do something quite special here when he bought the farm, and the ambition was to get back into distilling, and over time he built the site, and we moved in 2016, commissioned distillery 2017, and we just quietly existed and got on with what we do, growing barley, distilling, and our other ventures we have here.
And what are the other ventures that you've got going on?
So Morrison Scotch Whisky Distillers, we have other brands. So we have Old Perth, for example, which is a blended malt matured purely in sherry casks. We have Mactala, which is an Islay single malt. Brewed are a single malt liqueur. And we have Carnmore, which is a range of independent bottlings.
How are you distilling Mactala, and how are you getting the whisky for Old Perth?
Mactala and Old Perth are both sourced liquids, so we do a lot of buying and trading within the industry. So, for example, Mactala is an Islay single malt, or a range of Islay single malts. We don't operate an Islay distillery. Through our relationships, we are working with other distillers based on Islay, and it might be that we trade new make spirits with them. It might be that we buy new make spirits with them. But we're bringing new make from Islay, bring it onto site here, maturing here in our own woods, doing all of the blending work, etc. ourselves, and then bottling on site and distribution from here as well. And it's the same story for Old Perth. We're sourcing various different new makes and aged spirits from Speyside, blending them together here, maturation here as well, and bottling, etc. here.
Okay, so thank you very much for having us. It's lovely to be here and see the distillery, and we're excited for your whisky launch. Brian, would you be able to give us a potted history of your family's history in distilling?
In distilling, it all started in 1963. My father, Stanley P. Morrison Limited, was a whisky broker, had been for many years, and he got the opportunity to buy Bowmore Distillery on Islay in the summer of 1963. And so we distilled at Bowmore for many years until we sold out to Suntory in 1995.
And you had other distilleries as well?
We had indeed. We bought Glengarry Distillery at Old Meldrum from Scottish Malt Distillers. Later in 1984, we bought Auchentoshan Distillery from E.D. Cairns. And interestingly enough, when we bought the Bass Charrington stock of whisky from them, it included Auchentoshan Distillery, but they weren't sure if the Morrison price included the distillery or not, and we had to assure them, yes, it did include it. But they said, eventually, after comparing prices, would you mind if you didn't get the distillery? My father said no. He didn't mind, and yet we bought it 14 years later.
Oh, wow. And so, obviously, that is a long period of time to be in distilling and sold to Suntory. What made you leave and what made you come back? Because this is a bit of a return, isn't it? I'm just on the sort of on the outside, as it were. But it's wonderful to see. Well, the family wanted out. My father's partner, James Howitt, he had retired. I'd taken over as MD, and so he wanted to sell out. And my brother was in the business but had retired, and so it came about that the other shareholders also wanted to sell. So I did the deal with Suntory. I kept 35% and sold them the rest, 65%, and we kept that going for about 5 or 6 years. Community was quite a big deal. I mean, we were up in Islay with Mactala a few years ago, and there was a lot of chat about the work that you guys had done in the community, and there's a lot of lovely stories and a lot of good feeling about it. How important was it for you to sell to someone to continue that on?
Well, we had known the family reasonably well, the Tory family, really. My father went to Tokyo in 1964 for the Olympics, and he had a letter of introduction from Justerini and Brooks, who were then supplying Suntory with vatted malt. And they were quite keen, actually, to exit the supply deal because J&B was starting to fly in those days, especially in the States. So it was an easy introduction, and he met Michio Tori, he met the other members of the family, and then it took about three years before we actually did the first transaction, before we sold them vatted malt business. And I go to Islay now. They've been wonderful guardians, they really have. They've given a lot to the village. And of course, we had an old warehouse at Bowmore Distillery that we gave to the community, which is now the swimming pool. and gymnasium. So it's wonderful for Islay.
Yeah. And now this is your son Jamie who's kind of in charge of this. How does that feel in terms of like a legacy?
Oh, it's wonderful. One has to be a hell of a proud, actually. Probably shouldn't say that, but no, we're absolutely delighted, and it's a great family thing. It's pleasing. And
Niel, do you want to just give us a little introduction to the different brands that are here, that the company's got?
Yeah, so under Morrison Scotch Whisky Distillers, we've essentially got 4 brands, soon to be 5. We've got Old Perth, which is a blended malt Scotch whisky, 100% sherry matured. We have Carmore, which is our independent bottling brand. Through Carmore, we bottle whisky from other distilleries as a classic independent bottler. We've got a single malt Scotch whisky liqueur brand called Broodar. And then we have Mactala, which is an Islay single malt Scotch whisky brand, which we introduced in 2019, just as we went to Morrison Scotch Whisky Distillers. And we realized that in our portfolio, we have, with the family's connection, such a great history and connection to Islay. And other than owning a distillery on Islay, we felt we had the opportunity to be custodians of an Islay single malt whiskey brand. And with Brian and Jamie's connections to the distilleries on Islay, we've been able to secure supply of really good stocks of very young Islay malt, which we then mature here on site and bottle under the Mactala brand. And the 5th brand to come into our portfolio will be the distillery brand, Aberargie, which we plan to launch in March of 2026.
Yeah, so it's quite a very distinctive brand with distinctive flavours. Was that always the plan? Was it, these very specific things you wanted?
I think we really looked at our portfolio around 2019, and some of the brands that were in our portfolio didn't really have a sense of place or didn't make sense for us. So we rebranded a few brands. Old Perth completely rebranded into what is now 100% sherry matured blended malt. Islay Mactala was quite an easy one for us because as an independent Islay bottler, it gives us the opportunity to represent the island rather than a single distillery. So the idea and the DNA of Mactala is very much to represent Islay in its entirety and show that the whiskey from Islay is not one-dimensional. It's not all about peat and smoke. There's much more to it. Under Carmore, we have absolute freedom and flexibility to bottle from any distillery within Scotland. So that gives our production director, Graeme, a lot of creativity and flexibility. And then Broodar is just a nice addition to the portfolio. Still whiskey-led, only using single malt Scotch whisky, using honey from our beehives here on the farm. And it is something slightly different, but still within the Scotch whisky portfolio category, I would say. And then, the distillery brand is our own single malt distillery brand from our own distillery, which is very, very exciting, and we've been waiting for quite a while.
Patiently.
Absolutely.
Well, we talked about that. It has been, when you launch it will be 9 years, which is quite relatively unusual for like a new distillery. So I know the liquid, you wait till the liquid is ready, but you've been able to wait that time, which is quite unusual, which is good.
Yes, I think it's having the other brands in the portfolio that provided the impetus to the business and having the stocks too, which is absolutely essential.
I think having the stocks, also the family's sort of long-term vision that, they're obviously well versed in the whiskey industry and having some experience. We know that the whiskey industry is a long-term game and you need patience because the stock needs to be ready and be mature. But having the other brands and the commitment from the family, from an investment point of view, allows us the opportunity to wait until we are 100% comfortable with the liquid quality.
So it's coming out in March, but some people have tried it at the London Whisky Show. What was the overall feeling?
The Whisky Show was absolutely incredible. We took the opportunity to attend the Whisky Show without having a single bottle to sell. One of the requirements for attending the Whisky Show is that you have to have product available to sell through the shop. So we had a really good conversation with Dawn Davies, who runs the Whisky Show, and asked her permission to give us a stand, even though we had nothing to sell. But it gave us the opportunity to show the brand for the first time in public. We've been rather quiet and for the last 7 years. And it gave us the opportunity to then talk to consumers and trade and tell them the story about Aberargie and what it is that we do. So one, that we exist, and two, what it is that we do here. So it's 100% barley to bottle operation. So we gave people the opportunity to taste our new make spirit from 2 different barley types. So we use Golden Promise barley, which we grow on this farm, and also Laureate barley. And the new make spirit is really different. Golden Promise is very structured, very big, and therefore for flavor. Laureate is very light, very fresh, very crisp. And it's interesting to see that not a lot of consumers have experienced new make spirit before. And then we also gave them an opportunity to try whiskey that's been matured in bourbon barrels versus whiskey that's been matured in sherry casks. And that is to illustrate what bourbon maturation and sherry maturation means for us. And essentially the inaugural release of Aberargie in March of 2026 will be a combination of these 4 elements. So whiskey distilled from Laureate and Golden Promise barley, and a vatting of whiskey matured in first fill bourbon and first fill sherry casks. So the overall response was very, very positive. And I think for us, everyone that was there, it was just reassuring and comforting to know that all the time and effort we've put in over the last 7 years has been absolutely worth it, and that we are on the right track, so to speak. So,
what is interesting, actually, you were talking about Golden Promise. Golden Promise was a favoured varietal of barley, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, 80s, and it went out of fashion because it wasn't very profitable for the farmers. The yields were low. The maltsters also got a low yield out of it, and really for the distillers, they didn't. But what was paramount was the flavours that came from Golden Promise. So I think being wrong here, but I seem to remember Highland distillers, you know, with Glenrothes and Glenglassaugh and Macallan, and back in those days, they were heavily Golden Promise distilled barleys, and then it just simply, the yields are not good enough. But however, it's come back in to a number of single distilleries that are favouring it, including ourselves. We're quite heavily disposed towards Golden Promise in terms of our liquid stocks.
But that's interesting that it's come back. So it would have been in most whiskies, that barley would have been, and it's almost like an old fashioned. So people hark back to the original whiskies from certain things like Macallan and be like, oh, that's when it was amazing, and this would be something to do with that. That type of variety would be like, you know, what was the people hark back to, like, you know, the golden age of whiskey making would be.
You know, old fashioned is such a nice term for us, because for me it links back to traditions. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are not trying to do anything that no one in the whiskey industry has ever done before. We're trying to do the basics in our way, and we're trying to do it the best way we know how. That makes sense for us. And the use of Golden Promise is one of those things. And I remember when I worked at Edrington with Macallan, they were predominantly Golden Promise. And as Brian said, it's come back to a few small distilleries. So distilleries, generally speaking, smaller, independent, family-owned distilleries that understand the value of the flavour that comes off Golden Promise. With the right investment behind it, we can account for the losses in output or the low yields, because you get significantly more alcohol off a ton of Laureate than you get off a ton of Golden Promise. But the flavor profile and the structure of the spirit is so significantly different. Takes us back to the
days
old
of yore.
Yeah.
Showing my age. But no, I'd agree entirely with you. Some of the other distillers are now bringing it back in.
Just back on Whiskey Festival, when we got people to taste it, the best response or compliment I received was a gentleman drank the whiskey and he said to me, it tastes like it's old and considered, and it tastes like you've taken your time. He said, it reminds me of like a big armchair in front of a fireplace rather than one of these newer whiskies that are young and fresh and vibrant. This to me feels very traditional. And I think that was absolutely spot on. And he almost apologized for saying it's traditional. And like that is exactly what we're trying to achieve.
Because you need to stand out now, don't you? I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the market and changes that have happened since you guys started. So you need something to be your USP. So was that your intention from the start, to sort of buck the trend of not being traditional, being not that you're not innovative, but you've gone back to tradition rather than seeking out different?
I think absolutely, and it goes back to the long-term vision of the family. But we've never set out to be a distillery to be necessarily recruiters. So we're not running after highballs or cocktails. We are for the whiskey drinker, and we say, it's patiently curated for special moments. Now, special moments for me is such a lovely term because it can mean so many different things. I know you're off to a wedding, and that is a very special moment. But a special moment for me could be myself and Brian sitting alone, just sharing a dram. It could be myself sharing a dram with my brother or, a friend. It could also be just me sitting on my own from time to time, and I consider that a very special moment. So it is less about new, young, fast-paced. It is more about patience, considered, time, just, tradition, I think. We're not scared of that at all.
I think we have to. We live with it. I drink quite a bit of my own. Well, not I drink a lot of my own, but at night I will open up a white wine glass. I love drinking out of a white wine glass. Put a couple of cubes of ice and get a Mactala or an Old Perth, and I do like the latest Bodega, and just have that, and it's just wonderful just to sip it and drink it and. Watch the news, no matter how bad it is.
So we're in what looks like where the barley would come in.
Yeah, so we're stood next to our two malt bins. So we obviously grow all of our own barley. Simpsons do our malting. So after harvest, our barley travels down to Berwick-upon-Tweed, and then every week we would take at least one load of that back. So a 28-ton load comes back into us on a weekly basis. So we're stood next to our two malt bins.
And it's quite a small operation.
The notion of small is relative. If you were to compare us to the Diageos of the world or the Edgingtons of the world and some of their distilleries that are capable of 15 million litres of alcohol a year and whatnot, yes, we're a relatively small operation. If you were to compare us to some of the more modern boutique distilleries and whatnot, like Strathern, we're colossal in comparison to that. Theoretically, if we were to run 24/7 and run 45 weeks a year, which is about normal for a distillery, we have the capacity to produce 1 million litres of alcohol a year. Where we are at the moment, we tick over at about 350,000 litres of alcohol a year. So it's not a small operation, but it's not a massive operation either. The focus isn't on volume, the focus is on quality. So on this side we have the wash still, fairly classic in its style, nothing particularly weird or unusual about it. Spirit still again, maybe not classic Lowland style, probably more in line with something you would get from up in Speyside. A boil ball to encourage reflux, which increases copper contact, which generates a slightly lighter style of spirit. At the same time, though, that's counteracted by things like downward-facing line arms and whatnot to encourage a little bit of a stronger character. So it's all about striking a balance. While we are looking for something richer and heavier than your classic Lowland style, you're still trying to encourage a little bit of weight with things like your descending line arms and whatnot.
If everything is sort of skewing slightly Speyside, did you ever think about going up there, or is it just too saturated?
Definitely well populated. I don't know if it's quite at saturation. I think from a practical point of view, family are based down here. Jamie lives locally.
The Lowlands right now is really interesting because there's a few pockets that are pushing to be more categorised themselves, like Fife, and then we spoke to Sam Hume recently and he was saying Dumfries and Galloway.
Lowlands there's definitely a bit of a renaissance. You've got loads of new distilleries and you've got loads of distilleries that have come of age relatively recently, and it's Fife in particular, they have this identity crisis where they want to be recognised as their own little region, which I can entirely get. Lowland as a region, there's a historic belief that perhaps maybe not as high quality as a Speyside or a Highland or an Islay, for example, which that notion is archaic. The idea that you can categorise spirit style by location it's old hat. There's no facts in there. A distillery in the Lowlands can produce a weighty spirit which reflects Highland. We can produce a peated spirit that reflects the similar style from Islay, etc. And similarly, all of these distilleries up in Islay or over in Islay, up in the Highlands, could generate a super lightweight, really floral, really approachable whiskey, just like a Lowlander can. Equally, we sit right on the border between Highland and Lowland, that we don't necessarily identify ourselves as either. We make single malt Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, so what we've got in front of us is essentially two expressions of Aberargie. On the left-hand side, the lighter coloured one is matured in first fill bourbon casks, so that's American oak, that we filled for the first time in Scotland. When we buy the American barrels, we specify that they are unrinsed, and they come across in the whole barrel. It's not broken up and put together again like most other barrels. And we've matured this for 7 years in first fill barrels, combination of Laureate and Golden Promise. So just on the nose, there's a lovely sweetness that is so typical of the American oak bourbon barrels. But there's also a structure to it, which is a combination of age. So 7 years worth of maturation in first fill wood is quite long for a new distillery. It's quite young in the bigger whiskey world, but also a large percentage of this would be from Golden Promise barley, which, as we've discussed before, is all about structure and flavour. Now, if you just nose that compared to the glass we've got on the right, so it's darker in colour, and this has been matured in first fill sherry casks, so casks that had sherry in before or was seasoned with sherry. 100% first fill, matured for the same length of time, so 7 years. And on the nose, the sweetness is more fruity than candy-like. So for me, the bourbon barrel is candy and vanilla, and the sherry cask is more dried and stewed fruits. A little bit of spice. And I almost think about it as spring and autumn. And the sherry cask, we use a combination of Oloroso sherry and PX sherry. So these are two single components, and essentially when we put the first bottling together, we will use a combination of these two components in a way that we feel is the most complex and balanced.
Do you want to taste some?
Yeah, why not?
Cheers.
But they will have been married in a cask for a few months before bottling.
Absolutely. So they're actually married already, and we've then put them back to wood, which is the marrying period for a few months before we actually put it in the bottle. So what do you think?
It's really nice, yeah, sorry. I thought you were going to say something there. It's really well rounded, like it's not, there is a spiciness there, but it's not in your face. It's very easy to drink, it's quite fresh.
Yeah, so that's the bourbon cask. Then when we go to the sherry, slightly bigger mouthfeel, more warm, lots more spice. So, and I really think of this as autumn. You know, in the next month or two, if you were to drive through Perthshire, and you look at all the colours of the leaves, the orange and the yellows, and that's really the image I have in my head.
It's really like nice long finish, quite sweet. It's lovely. Yeah. So it's going to be good.
We're taking orders, by the way.
So obviously this is going to launch in March. How many bottles? What kind of price point are you thinking? Is it the start of your core range, or is it going to be limited?
So this is our inaugural release, which means it is a limited number of bottles released in March in quite a few markets around the world. Asia might launch slightly later. Our ambition then is, after the inaugural release, to release 2 sets of expressions, which is essentially the 4 pillars that we've spoken about, individually, and then launch with a core range product in May of 2027.
So it'll be a 10-year-old?
No, it probably won't be a 10-year-old, and the reason for that is we started distilling only in November 2017, so the stocks of 2017 is really small. So the stock that we use at the moment is all 2018 stock. And I think that's really important to note, that we are using our oldest stock, because what we could have done was wait 7 or 8 years, but then still use 3 or 4 year old whiskey, because from a pricing point of view, that's far cheaper. But we're not, because we've waited all this time for a very good reason. So we are using our oldest stocks. 10th of March 2026, we aim to be on shelf in the UK and most markets in Europe on the same day, with our inaugural release.
Nice. And do you have an idea of price point, or not really yet?
We do have an idea. It's not
confirmed
just yet.
Brian, just to come back to you, so we talked about this last time I saw you, but we talk about tradition and coming into the market with this as like a bit of a USP, because the whisky market is kind of going through peaks and troughs, and we're currently in a bit of a trough. What are your sort of thoughts about everything that's going on, and how do you see the future?
I think the future is good, yes. There's a lot of stock in the market, and that's having its effect. And there are new spirits coming on all the time. But no, as you said, the industry is cyclical. And I think I've been through a few of them, but I have nothing but optimism for the industry. And I think single malts, especially family-owned single malt businesses, will continue to flourish. It'll be tough, because there's some big boys out there, heavy hitters, but there is a market for the independent single malt bottler.
And you think family businesses will flourish because they're smaller and a bit more agile? Or?
I think they're agile, yes, and they can move more quickly, and they can introduce one-off single bottlings very quickly, whereas at some of the larger companies it takes a while for that process to go through. Here we could do it, I think, reasonably quickly with the blessing of Graeme.
The advantage we've got is we've got the bottling facility on site, so we are not relying on anyone else to bottle or blend, or the only external things we rely on is dry goods supply. Everything else is in our hands.
Yeah, and I think we're very fortunate in that we do have the other brands to sustain the business while we waited for Aberargie to come through.
So if we were here in 2 years' time, what would you be hoping to see?
I would like to think there will be more editions of this coming out. It has to be. It's hard to say because we're looking at various options, but I see the going forward as strong. And we have a very good relationship, both within the industry, but also within the retail side of the industry, especially the independent retailers. I think that's a strong point in our favour, and we got on well with them, and we try and help them as well.
Yeah, and have you found with this company kind of coming back into it, that the family name obviously does mean a lot.
I think it helps, yes. Because people can always hark back to the old days, but the old days, well, the old days were, but yes, I think it does.
I also think the family, we employ 20 people at the distillery and Morrison Scotch Whisky Distillers, and I think having the family and the security that brings for the staff is really, really important. They know the family, the vision of the family is long term. We've had a few tough years behind us, but I think having the family support and guardianship around this place is really important from a staffing point of view as well.
Yeah, I mean, Graeme, we talked to Graeme, he's been here.
Man and boy.
Yeah.
No, he joined us back in, I think, 2005, when we had the Scottish Liqueur Centre at Bank Food. And he came in, he knew little or nothing about bottling spirit or anything, but he learned very quickly, never afraid to ask questions, and he's just absorbed it all. And now he's we didn't think we'd be a distillery back in 2005 or 10, but here he is running our production side. It's that's quite heartwarming for us, and there are other people within the company too who have been here for some years.
That must be nice to have, the importance of a team that you can trust. But what is your involvement? Sorry, I'm going to have to ask that again.
No, I'll tell you. Well, very, very little. I'm just the old fellow in the background. No, Jamie and I talk a lot about it, and I was back in the days of yore, I was keen on inventory. Because we were whisky brokers as well as being distillers. But inventory is key to an independent Scotch whisky company. You've got to have stocks, especially if you've got the other brands like Old Perth and Mactally. You've got to have that backup.
So we talked about this with Graeme a little bit. So the whisky is, the character would lean more probably Speyside, or it's a bit more robust than a lowland. And we talked about, the different regions and how these days it doesn't really reflect the taste profile anymore, and there's certain pockets like Fife who want to be classed as Fife rather than Lowland. So what would your thoughts be on that, having witnessed the industry over a number of years?
I think you go back to the days when you had the definitions, and I think it was from Greenock to Dundee. Anything below that basically was a lowland whisky. You can call it Fife, but anything above that was Highland. And you live within that, did it? We're a lowland distillery. And just be happy with that, I think. But you can produce whiskies within that definition, and then cask maturation too.
When I joined the whisky industry 25 years ago, it was very much, lowland was very light and in style. The Highlands were more mature. The Speysides were very easy. Everything on Islay was peated. I think we understand the process so much better, and we can influence the process at various stages now, where you have some peated malt being produced on the mainland, you have unpeated whiskey being produced on Islay. I think we are beyond that specific flavour classification, because I certainly don't think we fit the traditional lowland style of whiskey, even though geographically we are, strictly speaking, a lowland whiskey. We can influence through the use of different barley types like Golden Promise, through the use of different cask types, through the length of the fermentation, how we run our stills. You can produce almost any style of whiskey in any region. But I think for an entry-level consumer, the regions were a really easy, sensible place to start.
But thank you very much. It's been lovely to speak to you and try the whisky, and I'm excited to see what it's like in March.
Thank you very much.
Yes, well, thank you.
So this is the first warehouse we built. When we built this alongside the distillery. Started filling this in 2017. Currently, this warehouse is full. This holds circa 5,000 casks. The other warehouse on site holds just shy of 30,000 casks, which again is not far off being full. In here we have a mixture of first fill sherry casks and first fill bourbon barrels. So on your left you see big sherry butts. That's where your generous dried fruits and spices come from. And then on the right we have bourbon barrels where your notes of vanilla, coconut, etc. come from. We deal direct with suppliers for wood, so we're not going to Speyside Cooperage or the likes, for example, and having them as a middleman. We are dealing direct with our suppliers in Spain for our sherry wood. We're dealing direct with cooperages in America and whatnot for bourbon barrels and bringing them in ourselves. This is one of my favourite areas of the business. This is where new mixed spirit comes in from the distillery. It comes in from other places as well. If we go back to talk about McTowell Perth, this is where we bring new mixed spirit into the warehouses, fill it into our vats, fill to cask, etc. So it's where spirit starts its journey into becoming whiskey, but it's also where our aged casks come to be disgorged to become finished products. So it's the start and the end of the process. This is where the creative part of the whiskey making process happens. So almost any bottling is a recipe of different cask types, or if it's a blend, for example, different single malts and grain whiskies, etc., coming together. And this is the area where that happens. My favourite area, one of our busier areas as well.
What are your hopes for the next 12 months? Because you're going to have a busy period coming up. Yeah,
we are going to be busy. For me, the biggest hope is that Aberargie does well. We obviously have been working away on this since 2017. We're quietly confident. We've created something unique and something special. My only hope is people enjoy it. Yeah, it's enjoyed and shared around the world, and people at some point maybe buy a second bottle, maybe come to see us if there is something in the future in terms of visitor centre, etc., and just love it the same way we do. That's all I can ask.
Well, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Thanks to Graeme, Brian and Niel for being my guests on this episode, and thanks to you too for listening. Please remember to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Scran. Scran is co-produced and hosted by me, Rosalind, and co-produced, edited and mixed by Kelly Crichton.